Hey everyone, Kevin here with Victory 4x4. In this video, we're going to be installing our Evolution Series roof rack on this 2024 Lexus GX 550. So here we have all the major components of the rack that you're going to need to get it assembled and installed. We've got our mounting brackets and hardware, front and rear fairings, the textured black side rails here, as well as the gray textured accent plates that come along with it, and then 8 of our extruded aluminum crossbars back here. We'll start things off by bolting the crossbars into the aluminum side rails. So we'll get a few of these things out of the way real quick. So just a couple quick things to note for this step. You're obviously going to need the side rails. We're really just starting with one, and we'll kind of bolt the crossbars in all the way down one side and then kind of repeat the process on the other side. You're bolting them into the 1/4 inch slots here at the top. So again, 8 of these slots will kind of help you identify where you're going with those. The logo is going to be the rear of the side rail, or the rear of the vehicle. And then you need a 5/32 hex, as well as ideally some anti-seize, which we're going to recommend you install on each of the fasteners going into these crossbars. Now when it comes to the crossbars, the only thing really to note here is the 2 slots that you're going to find milled into one end of that crossbar. Ideally, we put those all up in the same direction, so typically toward the driver's side of the vehicle is our preference, but do what works best for you. Those are for accessory mounting to get your hardware down into these slots without having to unbolt the crossbars from the roof rack side rail. So keeping that in mind, you're going to need 2 of the 1/4-20 by 3/4 long stainless button heads with washers for each end of each crossbar. We do again recommend a little bit of anti-seize on there, so I put a little bit on this one already. We can then kind of slip that through the slot in the side rail. Again, pay attention to the milled slots in the crossbar itself, and then we'll start each of these into that crossbar by hand. From here, we just need a 5/32 hex. At this time, we're just going to lightly snug these up roughly in the center of each slot. You obviously can adjust them anywhere in there as needed for any accessory mounting purposes, but again, for now, the center of the slot works great, and we'll tighten all of that up again at the end of the install. Now you are seeing us assemble this rack with our stainless hardware kit. Keep in mind that we do offer a black hardware kit that you can purchase as well if you want kind of that blacked out look all the way down the side rail for your installation. From here, it's just a matter of repeating that process again for the remaining 7 crossbars all the way down this side and the opposite side rail. So we're not going to bore you with that. I'll kind of get all of that installed here real quick, and we can keep moving forward. After you have the main center section of the rack assembled, you can find the gray textured side accent plates. These are simply going to line up with the mounting holes along the side. They're going to bolt in with 1/4-20 button heads as well, but for these we do provide you black stainless button heads with washers and serrated flange nuts to go here on the inside. At this time, you're just going to be looking for the single bolt holes along the side, and you're going to leave hardware out of the lower kind of pairs, if you will, that are going to go to the 4 mounting brackets that secure the rack to the roof up on the vehicle. And then just like the crossbar mounting hardware, these will be tightened with your 5/32 hex. After that, you can move on to your front and rear fairings. So we're going to start out with the front, which is the larger of the 2. Nice and flat across the front, no cutouts or anything there. You're going to find the provided edge lock trim, and essentially what you're going to do with this is start at one end just past the point. So I like to go about an inch, 1.5 inch past, somewhere in there roughly, and you'll just press that on and work your way all the way across to the other side. Once you get to the other end, you are going to have some excess here that needs to be cut off. So essentially, you can just kind of use your thumb as a guide to mark that, again, about an inch, 1.5 inch past, and you'll trim this off. You can see I'm using some tin snips or sheet metal shears here. That is because there is kind of some aluminum structure inside of this edge lock trim. You want to make sure, 1, that you have something sharp enough to cut that, and 2, that any of these little pieces that are kind of sometimes left hanging out of the end get removed. So grab those with some pliers if you're having any trouble getting them out, and just pull that out of the way so there's no risk of that contacting the paint on the vehicle. And then you'll push the rest of this tight to the front fairing to kind of complete the assembly of this. The fairing can then be slid in between the two side rails and bolted to the rack. Now admittedly, I did start one bolt behind me here to kind of stabilize this so I can show you what's going on out on this end. Basically, you've got two slots on the fairing itself that you're gonna line up with the two 1/4 inch bolt holes here on the side. You're gonna slide a couple of those 3/4 long, 1/4 button heads in there, again with washers, and then the flange nuts on the inside. From there, again, you do have the slots, so this is adjustable up and down, and temporarily I'm just gonna push it pretty much all the way up and just lightly snug these up for now. This will need to be adjusted again toward the end of the install. From there, you can grab the rear fairing and the remaining piece of that edge lock trim. What you're gonna do here is basically just cut this right down the middle. You can measure it or just eyeball it, that's up to you. And same thing here, kind of clean up the ends. And then grabbing the rear fairing, you're just gonna take each of these halves and come out to the points on the end and kind of do the same thing, just past the point, and press that in nice and tight. And then you can take this and bolt it into the rear of the rack in a very similar fashion using 2 bolts out on each side. With the roof rack assembled, we now need to make room up here on the vehicle's roof to accept the new mounting brackets. So for that, we got to start off by getting these factory roof rails out of the way. Starting right here at the front, we've just been using a plastic pry tool and a microfiber cloth. You can put the microfiber down between the paint and the tool. You can even kind of wrap the end in it if that's what works for you. And then basically we're just trying to get underneath this front edge. Toward the inside corner has worked pretty well for us to start popping these up. And then once you get the front up, the whole thing kind of just slides forward and out of the way, exposing the mounting hardware. To remove this hardware, you'll need to grab a 12mm socket, and we can pull both of these bolts out of the roof here. Then moving back to the middle mount, this one is basically like a U-shaped plastic cover here. So you want to reach in and just grab the back corner and kind of pull out. And that should allow this to pop free and just slide right out of there. That'll expose a single bolt head here that you'll have to remove again with your 12mm socket. Then lastly, this rear cap is essentially the same style as the front, so just get your pry tool under the end here and pry up. That should free up the cap, and you can then slide it a little bit toward the rear, and again remove 2 bolts here with your 12mm socket. With all the hardware removed, you may have to rock this rail just a little bit to kind of break that initial seal, and then you can just lift this up and the entire thing can be pulled off of the vehicle. With that rail out of the way, you'll grab a 10mm socket and come back to the mid-mount location where you can remove 2 fasteners holding down this center mounting bracket. And then you should be able to grab a hold of the mounting bracket itself and again kind of break the seal on there and lift it out of the way. From there you can go repeat that same process over on the passenger side. Then you'll come up to the front and you're going to remove just this forwardmost section of rubber trim, if you will. It kind of sits down in this rain channel. The back is easy enough to pick up, but it does have a clip here at the front, so you can kind of pry just up on one side. Usually gets it started and then slip it out from under there. It's just got 2 kind of locking tabs that snap on the outside of that are secured down in here on the roof. We'll save this because we're going to modify it and reinstall it later on. But from there you just want to clean out this channel, make sure it's nice and clean and dry, as well as all of the remaining mounting locations across the roof. From here, you can grab all your mounting brackets. We'll kind of do a little bit of prep work on these as well as start getting them installed both on the rack and on the vehicle. I have them here laid out how they go on the vehicle from front to rear. They are all labeled, so basically the last digit or 2 digits in the part number is going to identify that. So here I have the front mount F, you have FM, you have RM, and then simply R for the rear. These are also going to have forward-facing arrows to kind of help you identify the front edge of the mount. Make sure they're pointing toward the front of the vehicle. The only one that doesn't is the 2-part mount here, or the FM mount. The only reason for that is they're identical from side to side, so it doesn't really matter kind of how you install this one as long as you have the correct 2 pieces bolted together like this in the correct orientation. So starting out with the front or the F mount, I have one assembled one here. This in this orientation would be the passenger side. I've already got the 2 rubber bumpers installed on the bottom of that. You're going to need to do that for both of these, so you'll find the rubber bumpers in your hardware pack and install these on the 2 holes in the bottom face of the mount there. Basically, you can kind of just start that and sort of twist it while pressing, and they snap in pretty easily. And then now, since this one is going to be the driver's side, basically this is just going to sit down in this rain channel here on the roof, and we'll kind of adjust that and set tension on it toward the end of the install. So this one can be bolted to the side rail in the forwardmost set of mounting holes on the rack. Then moving to the second mount, or the FM mount, you'll have the 2 pieces. So these 2 are the driver's side. Basically, you're going to bolt the top half to the rack itself loosely and the bottom half to the vehicle. You're going to need to find the flange bolts that are going to slide through the bottom of this mount and into the square cutout holes here. You need something to retain these during the install, because when you have it down here on the roof, 2 things: you don't want them to fall out and contact the paint and potentially cause any scratches or damage there. So you can either put a piece of tape across the bottom here, or what I would recommend doing is just taking a piece of tape and placing it down on the roof. You can basically do that just inboard of this first threaded mounting location. That will just allow or provide a barrier between the bolts and the paint. You could also, if you have them laying around, so this is hardware that is not provided, just some loose 5/16 hex nuts. You can thread those all the way down on, and that'll kind of help secure that bolt in the mount just during this initial install process. What you're actually going to be using to secure the 2 halves together later on are flanged nylock 5/16 nuts that will be provided in your bolt pack. Or you can kind of just do a combination of all 3 of those things. Really, it's just a matter of finding what works best for you. So I have the bottom of these taped up just a little bit to help hold them into the mount. This will then get bolted down on here, and then the top mount, which again will be connected to the rack when you set the rack down on, using this inboard set of holes, will line up with those studs and can be fastened together. Continuing back from there, the other 2 sets of mounts are pretty simple by comparison. They simply are going to bolt down to the roof. We are going to again use some sealant on there, so we'll show you that on this FM mount, and you'll just repeat that process for all of the remaining mounts. But just a quick overview, that RM mount is going to angle forward toward the front of the vehicle like so, again paying attention to the arrows. And then the R, or the rear mount, will have kind of vertical slots on the side that's going to go out against the roof rack side rail, and then the round holes down in that channel bolting to the roof of the vehicle. Now from here, again, we mentioned already, you're going to be using some RTV sealant. So you want to start thinking about the dry time of the specific sealant you have. I have a Permatex Ultra Black right here, but really any black RTV should work out fine. Just pay close attention to your manufacturer's instructions there and make sure you're working within their recommended timelines. That being said, essentially all we're saying is you want to kind of be ready to work somewhat quickly. You want to have all your hardware ready and all your tools ready for these next couple steps. So for hardware to mount to the roof, you're going to find the M8 button heads and washers. This is going to be stainless hardware in your bolt pack. You can even double check Just make sure that you got the right thread there. And you want to have all those ready, so 2 per mount right here. And then to bolt the mounting sections to the rack side rails, you're going to be using those same 3/4 long, 1/4 20 stainless button heads, again with washers and flange nuts that you used on the front and rear fairings. So I'll get these bolted to the rack real quick. You'll see those a little closer as we go to adjust and tighten things toward the end, and then we can work on sealing and installing our mounts. Once you have everything ready, you're confident that you clearly understand how the mounts are going to go, we're ready to put our silicone on. Keep in mind on the FM mount that it is kind of a slotted hole, so you want to make sure to get plenty of sealant around the back side of these slots. Basically, we're just going to take that and do a nice circle around each of these little factory standoffs at the mounting location. You can be pretty liberal with this because you want to, again, get a good seal. And for the most part, this is all pretty well hidden up here unless somebody comes up really trying to look at it and investigate. So we'll put this down on. Once we know it's lined up, I'm going to add just a little more on top so we know the bolt has to kind of pass through it during install. And we know we're going to get a nice seal there. And then again, we'll take those M8 button heads with washers and thread them down into these locations. You'll need a 5mm hex for these. And then we're just going to kind of snug this up to both stand the mount up and get it basically where it's snug to the roof but still able to be moved with just a moderate amount of force so that we can adjust it as needed when we set the rack down on. And then we're going to repeat this process on all the remaining mounts. Then here we have the RM and the R mounts kind of installed with that RTV. We now need to have our 1/4 20 button heads with washers and flange nuts to go through the side rails, through the mounts, and into the nuts, kind of at the ready here so that we can quickly set the rack down on and get that bolted in place, as well as those 5/16 flange nylock nuts to go on the studs up here. That and the studs are kind of what's going to locate the rack front to rear as you get it set down. So grab a friend to help you lift it up here and kind of pay close attention to that location to start with, and then you can pass all that side mounting hardware through. So ta-da, movie magic. We've got the rack up here. Once you have that, you want to make sure to get all your hardware first started through the sides, and then you can take your 5/32 and essentially just draw these snug on the side. You still have some vertical adjustment to do later on in the slots on the side of your mounting brackets. But snugging these up will essentially draw your mounts parallel to this side rail, and you can then come back with that 5mm hex and tighten these down to the roof of the vehicle, kind of fully securing that in place and sealing everything up. So that will be the process for all 4 of these rear and rear mid mounts. Then coming up toward the front of the rack, you just want to make sure that the front mount has the rubber bumper seated all the way down tight in the rain channel. And then on this FM mount, to get things tightened up, you will want to loosen up this crossbar just enough that you can kind of slide it fore and aft. You want to have your 1/2" flange nylocks threaded onto the studs here. And then basically you can, again, lightly snug the mount to the outside side rail, and then grab your 5mm hex and pass it down through the slots in this upper half of the mount. You'll line it up with those button heads down there, and then tighten that up. And then simply sliding the crossbar back, you can do the same thing on that front bolt. Then paying close attention to the studs to make sure that they don't contact the roof. So I'm just kind of putting the edge of my finger under there to help hold it up. You'll grab a 1/2" socket and then use the adjustment in that crossbar once again to provide clearance so that you can line these up and tighten them up. The only thing here, you can just kind of take a look side to side and make sure the rack looks nice and centered on your mounts. And then start snugging these up. You will be fully tightening these at this time. You can then get in here and remove any tape or anything you may have been using, and then tighten this crossbar back up. So in this configuration, we have the half rack up here on the vehicle. There's only a couple minor differences when you're installing this. So the first of which is going to be the filler or block off plate, if you will, for the two front holes that are left exposed. We do still recommend installing this with some RTV like you would the front mount on the full rack, so keep that in mind. But just to give you a visual of it here, it's going to drop on and line up right over top of those factory kind of plastic standoffs. You'll install the M8 button heads we provide. Again, keep in mind, with some sealant in there. And then with a 5mm hex, of course, you can tighten these up, sealing off those exposed holes and giving it a nice clean look there. So you'll have one of those for the other side, and then coming back here to the front mount on this rack, it's going to be the same mount as the front mount of the full length roof rack. We now just provide you a spacer that's going to go between this mount and the inside of this side rail. So you'll slide that down in. That'll provide the correct width for these mounts, and then you can install your 1/4-20 button heads from out here. Now the adjustment procedure for that is going to be identical to the full length rack, since it is the same style mount. And other than that, once you've got that installed over on the other side, the only real difference is where you're going to install your paint protection film, but you do that in the same manner as you would on that full length as well. At this point, we'll be adjusting side rail height. So basically, I'm going to start with the rear two mounts. We're going to set our desired gap between the roof and the bottom edge of the roof rack side rail, keeping in mind that whatever you're going to be installing up here will have some dynamic load to it. You may see some very minor shift in this gap throughout time as you're driving down the road. So make sure you have enough space there to account for that. And then you can go ahead and tighten up the hardware on both of these rear mounts. Again, this will be your 5/32. We'll then use the two front mounting brackets to preload this forward mount. That's the bumper mount that's down in that rain channel. So a couple things here. You want to kind of snug this one up and then just back it off enough that it can be adjusted, so you know that it's kind of stood up as vertical as possible during this step. And then coming back here, we're going to be kind of using this to preload it. So I'm going to set it just a touch below where the desired height's going to be, knowing that we're going to pull back up on the front to preload it. So I'm pulling down just a touch here and tightening both of these mounting fasteners. And then shifting back to the front mount, we're going to basically lift up on the front edge of the rack while making sure that inside mounting bracket is still down tight in the channel, and then tighten up this outside hardware. And when we let go of this, that should be pretty well preloaded down into that channel. From there, you'll be adjusting the front and rear fairings. Essentially, these are slotted on the side, so all you have to do is push them down tight to the roof. However, to protect your paint, we're going to recommend you install some of this paint protection film. What we have here is just from 3M. This is about a 1-inch wide section, but you can purchase it in multiple different widths, so go with what you're comfortable with there. The way we do that typically is to get the fairing roughly in the position we want it to end up in at the end. I then take some blue tape, like I have here, or any sort of masking tape will do. I put the edge of this tape about a 1/4 inch in front of the leading edge of the edge lock trim on the fairing, and kind of run that all the way across the front of the roof here. Once you have that all the way across, I like to just make a mark a little ways past where that edge lock trim stops contacting the roof. That'll give you a rough mark for where to stop your paint protection film. You can then either temporarily remove the fairing or just pull the forwardmost bolt out and flip it back up and out of the way so you can work in this general area. Before you put the film down, you want to make sure that the painted surface is nice and clean and free of any debris. So isopropyl alcohol or a good residue-free glass cleaner should work fine here. Just make sure that that is all cleaned off. From there, you can use your tape as a guide. you then want to have your paint film as well as ideally a vinyl applicator to kind of press this down across the roof, starting it at the mark we made earlier. And from here, it's just slowly working that down, trying to stay as close to the edge of your tape as possible, all the way across the roof. When you get to the other end, this trims up pretty easily with some scissors or a razor blade. So go ahead and complete that step. Once you're happy with that, just peel the tape you were using as a guide and get that out of the way. And then you can flip your fairing back down into position and reinstall that forward mounting hardware. With that hardware back in on both sides, you'll press the fairing down tight to the roof and the paint film that we previously installed, and then tighten up the mounting hardware, just kind of making sure that the height of the fairing across the top is pretty even across both sides. Now you can grab that factory trim that was down in that rain channel from the start. This is where we're going to trim that to fit. So essentially you want to trim it off so that it fits back into the clip here at the front and then stops just short of this front mounting bracket. You can get in here with a tape measure and kind of measure that out if you want to, or you can kind of eyeball it. The choice is yours. I'm going to basically eyeball it. We'll maybe make it just a little long, and then you can always trim more off to fit. I'm going to be cutting it with our tin snips or sheet metal shears, if you will. Admittedly, you might have to work at that a little bit. You can always use whatever tools you have available. If you have something you think is going to work better, no big deal there. Once you're happy with the length, it's just the reverse process of getting this removed essentially. So you do just want to make sure that it gets in behind the edge of the windshield seal. It clips in to the clip here on the front, and then press it down in tight to that rain channel. And then whether or not you choose to reuse the remaining section is up to you. Just note you will have to trim more off to account for the width of this bracket. And then there are no retainers on here. So you could probably get this to stick down in pretty easily with a few dabs of RTV, but again, that part's a little bit up to you because it is not required for the install, and it's hidden in here behind that where nobody's really going to see it. You can then repeat that adjustment process on the rear fairing, with the only difference back there being you just need a couple short pieces of that paint protection film, since you only had those two shorter pieces of the edge lock trim that were installed in the rear. Once you've done that, it's always a good idea to run back through and just double check that all of your mounting hardware is tight, and at that point this installation is complete. As always, if you guys have any questions at all about this product or anything else we offer here at Victory 4x4, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always send us an email at info@victory4x4.com or call us at 269-459-8447.